So what this is we're measuring the highest vibrational wavelength of light. So these are gamma rays, and they will ionize and hit and absorb into things instantly. And so there was some massive explosion that occurred like 2 billion light years away. And even after 2 billion years where it's getting absorbed into everything that it passes through, when it arrived on Earth, 2 billion light years away from that source, we had the biggest of all time count. The scale of that is beyond comprehension. For it to be such a strong signal, even after propagating out and being absorbed so much by everything it's passed through. And so I wonder, what was the information contained within that was delivered to Earth, and how has she been then delivering that information to us? Again, it's synchronicity that we're talking about it now, 2 years after it occurred. I think to the day, I think it was October 9th, maybe it was October 7th. And
Stefan Burns, welcome on Just Tap In, brother. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Well, I'm most excited about in my life. I'm excited to finally have a home. Bro, I've been traveling for like 3 years, and I've just been constantly moving places, and that's wonderful and amazing. And we just talked a little bit about how you've been kind of traveling a little bit more recently yourself. But it feels so good just to like be able to put down some roots, at least temporarily. Because I really feel like if you have deep roots, that's when you can really kind of reach up higher. And so it's like I've learned a lot, and I have a greater experience of the world now, but just having like a place that's my own, that I can like, work on like formatting and cleansing and purifying the energies and creating this really nice vibration in my apartment. And it just makes all the difference. It makes all the difference. That's what I'm really excited about right now. But I mean, there's so many things going now in terms of what's happening, and this whole like solar cycle ascension process. It's so invigorating. I'm seeing so many people awaken right now. I mean, me, one of them, right? But that's really exciting too. And so I feel like I can further help that mission and push kind of that ascension towards more people, because I finally have my own roots and everything, right? So that's really nice.
And San Diego's not a bad place to set up a home over there. It's beautiful. You get the sun almost 24/7 all the days of the week. And that's especially key to, I believe, the work that you're doing and connecting and bridging that world of what is going on planetarily, geomagnetically, metaphysically, with the sun, especially as that, guiding force to create these effects. You said that there are 2 more years of crazy solar activity. So what are these, as a bigger picture, what do these next 2 years really look like in terms of the solar activity and how that's impacting consciousness as a whole?
Well, solar activity, these are like solar flares. This is also just the actual magnetic flip of the sun, the polarity flip. So we can think about that, right? Like our main guiding engine is switching polarity. It does that every 12 years or so. So it's not like we're foreign to this. We hopefully live through quite a few of those, but it's not like it happens every week. And so this is a big fundamental change in our energy that we're going through right now. And the kind of the picture that I see with solar activity is, yes, you have in general more light energy being emitted from the sun. We can measure that. We have the scientific numbers and everything. We see how it changes. It's lower during minimum, higher during maximum. Certain like frequencies of light will go up dramatically, like an order or two of magnitude. So 20x, things like this, like dramatically more. But it's also the timing of solar activity. What I've noticed, and a lot of other people have noticed, is that it seems like there is very high amounts of solar activity clustered around very key moments that are in many ways determined by like planetary positions. So you'll have like a planet stationing retrograde or stationing direct. Pluto is a good one. Usually, when Pluto does some sort of station, it's stationary in our sky. That's what it appears, right? There's like some crazy flurry of solar activity, or often on portals, the numerology portals, 88, 99, 10, 10, things like that. Like we had a huge geomagnetic storm back on August 8th with the Lionsgate portal. We have another one coming up tomorrow with 1010. That's like the final completion portal. And so it's in general, lots of energy and information coming in from the sun, which just invigorates us. Think about the biology, just our metabolism, but also that then percolates up into our mental activity and, more physical like energy available to us and heightened spiritual awareness and consciousness. That's what it seems. That's what I've experienced. Countless people have experienced. But then you also have that timing component where it's on very clear like synchronistic events. And so there's a reason to this, you could say, like madness. And it feels very divinely guided. And so it's one of those things that you research into and you walk away like, how could this not be anything other than that? That's been my experience. That's my belief.
Yeah. And I love that you also merge aspects from astrology as well, and looking at the conjunctions, as you mentioned, with the planets. And I've heard you say that we are right now in what you call a harvest moment, where we're beginning to reap what we sowed back from 2020. Mm-hmm. So I think 2020 was a period of time where a lot of people were beginning to wake up. And what do you feel that we are reaping from that time frame, that we were all beginning to see the world differently?
Yeah, there were two really big planetary conjunctions that occurred in 2020. The first one was more of like a malefic one, and then the second one was a little bit more of a benefic one. And malefic is like kind of less good, but again, these are arbitrary labels. And then the other one's like more of a positive influence. The first one is January 12th, 2020. We had the Sun, Saturn, Pluto, Mercury, and the dwarf planet in the asteroid belt Ceres all conjunct within like a degree or two in the sign of Capricorn if we use Western tropical astrology. And that's where Pluto is right now. And not at that degree point at 29 degrees, but it's the final time Pluto will be in Capricorn, then it moves out. So not only is this a completion moment going back to like 2008, when Pluto moved into, or is it like, yeah, around that time period when Pluto moved into Capricorn, but it's also going to 2020. We had that conjunction, and then a whole bunch of shifts occurred on our planet, as we know, at the beginning of 2020. And then near the end of the year on winter solstice, December 21st, we had Saturn and Jupiter go conjunct in a great conjunction. And there's a few different things to be aware of with this great conjunction in the sky. That occurs every 20 years. That's their synodic cycle. They meet up. This is a synodic cycle or planetary resonance that's been tracked by the ancients for thousands of years because everyone can see, Saturn and Jupiter. They knew that Saturn was more distant than Jupiter. And so it was seen as a traditional like outer boundary. Every 20 years they meet up. It starts this new cycle of how we actually experience reality, the themes that we're being given to deal with and to work through, like the law and order and structure of our reality. And the interesting thing about these Jupiter-Saturn cycles is that they form triplicity cycles. So they all meet in the same element for like 150, 200 years. So when it shifts into that element, you have this great mutation. And we had that great mutation in 2020 at 0 degrees of Aquarius, which is where Pluto will move back to right after this Capricorn phase. And so you can see how all these things are connected, interlayered together. But this is starting like a new 150-year-long air triplicity cycle with the two biggest great gas giants in our solar system. And in 2024, right now, effectively, we have Jupiter and Saturn in their opening square. So it's our first like re-engagement period between these two. And so we're working with all those energies that were born in 2020, because that is like a great seed moment. You create this seed and then you plant it. What did you plant? How have you been watering it, right? How have you been tending to it? Have you planted anything else near it? Like, what does your garden look like? And that's all being presented to us amidst all this crazy solar activity too. And so it's a really powerful time, and people are really starting to see that. I mean, you can see this manifest in your life, but I also just really see it manifest in how people communicate and what their focus is on. Like, what is truly most important? I think that is now really starting to come into the fold and be presented center stage. And that's key, because you can have certain ideas and beliefs and they're kind of like in here, and that's great. But when you start to really truly live it fearlessly and you present that to everyone authentically, that's when real change occurs. We're having leaders step up now. We've always had leaders. Now we're having a lot of leaders who are awakened to some degree, step up and really make a huge change upon this planet. And so that's what I've seen happen right now with this first opening square, Pluto shifting into Aquarius, the sign of like the people, right? The collective, but also our own individuality. Solar activity is at a high. I mean, it's just so synchronistic. It's perfect.
And the next 150 years for probably everyone tuning into this is the rest of their lifetime. So we're going to be having these energies come in for as long as we live, let's say, for in this lifetime. So when you were mentioning about the element that is most prevalent at this time, what is that element that is coming up, or the theme coming up around the next 150 years?
Yeah, that element would be air. We have these conjunction cycles with Jupiter and Saturn occurring in air signs from now on, if we use Western tropical astrology, all the way till 2158, I believe. I think we have a conjunction in Scorpio in 2158.
Hope to be around still then.
Yeah, I mean, there's these longevity biohacker people who, are doing their best. I think they
a lot of grounding.
That is the key, dude. As a quick side note, if you look at the animals that live the longest, it's the ones that are always in contact with the earth, right? You have like whales, which I guess can live forever because they find that like their DNA can heal from mutations, and they found whales that were like 200 plus years old. Turtles are less likely to die each year that they live longer, right? And so eventually a predator gets them, but that's pretty crazy. And then like naked mole rats. If you look at a naked mole rat, it's a normal rat with no fur and lives underground in total contact, conductive contact with the earth all the time. Turtles are in the ocean. Whales are in the ocean in total contact with all the natural electric currents and Schumann resonances. And yeah, that's key. But with what we see right now is the air element's really, really dominant, not only with Jupiter-Saturn cycles, not only with Pluto moving to Aquarius, and also we have Pluto-Neptune conjunctions occurring in Gemini for like the next 4,000 years. We have other stuff that's occurring in the air element as well. I think that's really speaking to how we need to really embrace being very flexible. And just like the wind, it can go there, it can go there, it can go quick, it can all of a sudden go still. And we're seeing these changes in our environment too. Like if you take in recent events, we're seeing these really, really big hurricanes in the Gulf area and the Atlantic Ocean right now. That's all wind energy, right? That's our atmosphere. And I think there's this dynamic playing out where we need to learn to be adaptable and to move where universe wants us to a greater degree. We're moving out of this age of earth and into this age of air. And so that is going to be kind of like the call to arms, you could say, like be willing to move as the universe guides you. I think if we all do that, then that will really help our own consciousness evolution journey, but also kind of this like new earth that we're bringing in. It wants us to move around more.
And from your blended perspective of science and metaphysics, how do you see that the sun is affecting our heart in specific?
Yeah, that's the other, I think that ties in perfectly, because it's like, what is your heart telling you, right? We have the greatest intelligence in our heart. And so it's like listening to your heart, which then guides, going where universe wants us to move, focusing on what universe wants us to focus on, the movements and things of this nature. And so, I mean, solar activity is just pushing so much energy into the earth right now and into our heart chakras, our energy centers, and connecting us all to a greater degree too. And so, everyone has all their emotional energy in their body, and it's really focused very keenly in the heart. And so, with all this energy coming in, all of our heart chakras are connected to a greater degree, just in general in the background. And so, I think we're all starting to experience this blending and coming to a greater realization of what are the energies that currently do exist between us and that are at play with humanity, and how can me purifying my own kind of heart solar energy help this person over there. And when you work on your own, you're also then inherently working on everyone else's too. But I think it's leading us into being more courageous, be more willing to embrace change, take that leap of faith, and again, really like do that all from that loving, centered perspective, like to do it all with a greater understanding that we are all connected together through light, through love, and we need to be, amplifying that on the planet rather than feeding these other things that do exist that aren't working for the benefit and growth of our consciousness individually or collectively. So this opposing forces right now. If you have more light, you're going to have more dark. Darkness will be shown easier when there's more light. You create bigger shadows, but that is the task that we've been given, I believe, to look at that and then to continue to just purify it all and step forward into a new world, to create that new world.
So is it possible that the sun is activating these energy centers and these chakras that you talked about, like the heart?
I believe so. I know a lot of people are feeling that. A lot of people on my channel, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have been feeling that. I mean, just with like the science, we know that's working and how that occurs because we are bioelectric. Fundamentally, we're electric and magnetic fields pulsating. There's nested vibrations, and water is connecting to all these energies. It's mini magnets and has these quantum properties. So we go into science, but we don't need to. We can just go off of how we feel, what is actually showing up for us. I think the universe speaks to us and often does it in a very clear, precise way. And it's like, this is very clearly what you need to pay attention to, or here's your gift, right? And it's not as cryptic as people think.
How did your perspective about the universe change when you started to dig deeper into your understanding about human bioelectricity that you just mentioned?
It helped me to realize how we're all like more connected together. I mean, just for example, with our experience that we had right before we started recording, where you did the prayer, and as you were saying, we're bringing in ascended masters, I was thinking Saint Michael, and then all of a sudden you called in Archangel Saint Michael, Gabrielle, who are the two that I communicate with. It's like, okay. And then when you listen to that song, I have all these like shivers going up and down my spine. And, I'm in San Diego, you're in Spain. So we are not in the same room, but here we have this kind of like instantaneous connection, right? And that's all mediated through light. And so we have just so much more light energy coming in that makes those sort of connections easier, and therefore makes it like, it's really about experience. Once you experience it, it's impossible to deny. And so more and more people are just having those experiences, and that's key. And so I came into this from a bit more of a scientific perspective, though there's always been like a spiritual undercurrent. And as I researched into science more, I explored into the spiritual aspects more in these other dimensions, and they both were just in coherence. And so then it's like, okay, well, there's really clearly something here. I can't fool myself, nor do I want to. Like, this is so exciting. And so I quit my job and changed gears and everything, and wanted to experience the world and wanted to learn more about this. And the best way I could do that was to not have like a normal 9 to 5. So I could read all the papers I want, have all the experiences I want, like going to Egypt, like going to some of these ancient energy sites. And it's just constantly reinforced everything that I've observed and experienced. And it seems to be accelerating too. I mean, that's your experience, right?
Yeah. I mean, what that made me think of is once we have a spiritual experience or an experience that brings us outside of ourselves, looking at the greatness and the vastness of reality, you can't look at the world the same. And I know for you, you do a lot of that work and experience in the dream space. So I'm very curious to dive a little bit into your dream journal about if you've had any of these dreams that are revealing to you more about what's going on in the world, especially related to these geophysical phenomenon, and the sun as a whole.
Yeah. I've recently been reading through an old book from like the 1900s. It's called, it's just like this astrology book by Alan Leo. It's like, what is it? The Basics of Astrology. It's just like an intro book, but this guy is so good. He talks about all the different signs, and every single different zodiac sign has some level of like psychic connection. They just come in different flavors. And so some signs like Pisces or Cancer, Scorpio, like the water signs, are really good like mediums and channelers. But as what he talks about with Virgo, which is what I am, he mentions how they're very sensitive to their environment and like the subtle vibrations. And so I think that's why I have such a powerful dreaming ability. I have some water placements, I'm not deficient in water, but there are just these energies that exist of the past, the present, and then I also believe of the future, because I've had precognition dreams before, like, and not simple ones, like pretty complicated precognition dreams that I had. And then 3 months later, like it came true. It's like, that's pretty weird. You can't make that up. And so I've had a reoccurring kind of type of dream that I think answers your question and just kind of provides some guidance as to where we may be going. That's also, again, like reaffirmed by my scientific research, which makes me really think that this is probably what's going to happen. But who knows? Again, we are active co-creators in this. But I've had a ton of dreams about immense electrical activity on the planet, and they've come in a variety of ways. But just like so many more lightning strikes, like our global electric circuit is continuing to amplify. We see that scientifically based on a variety of factors. For example, every time you go up 1 degree, you hold 7% more water in the atmosphere. Water is the main thing that makes the atmosphere electric. We also have just a sheer amount of EMFs that we're pumping into our atmosphere, just in general, creating a more electrified environment. There's been some forward modeling done that says that if we continue to like increase the warming of our planet at the rate we are, and this kind of electrification, that there'll be 20 times more lightning strikes in the near future, which is mind-boggling because every lightning strike creates these Schumann resonances, which are these global energy fields that connect us together. That, light energy that's naturally resonant and harmonic with the earth. And I think we connect to those Schumann resonances when we are asleep. I think that is one of the base layers of the collective consciousness, because it's light energy. So it's energy and information. And it explains a whole bunch of things in terms of how there can be ideas transmitted around the globe simultaneously, how there can be information from the past saved. Like anyone that is like accessing the Akashic records very well perhaps could be tuning in to the Schumann resonances and scrying information from that database. We have our temporal lobes here on each side pulsing at the same foundational mode at 8 hertz. And this is what governs our ability to have spatial awareness, language, and time. So that's what you need to kind of reconstruct things in a more basically reality, right? You need space, time, and language. And so I've had these dreams of just sheer amounts, like massive amounts of electrical activity on this planet. And often they are connected to how there are a lot of people and then there are less people afterwards. And so one in particular was we were on this plane and we crash landed on like a beach, and people are roaming around, walking around, and there was like a lack of direction. And so I stood up and just gave some basic instructions like, we need to find water, food, and shelter. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's right.
Went to Bear Grylls mode out here, like survival.
I was really wondering about these people that are just wandering around. I was like, what are they doing? But so everyone started to kind of like go and do their thing. But I noticed in the distance this massive, and I don't want to put like fear into anyone. This is just a dream, okay? And that's why I don't claim to be like, a channeler that has prophetic visions of the future. But I think it's interesting, and the science is pointing this direction too. There was this massive dark gray wall of like a storm that was just crackling with these like yellow gold like lightning bolts, and it was moving towards us. And I was like, that is a crazy storm. And so there was like this little old abandoned house on the top of this like ledge. And I was like, get in the house, get in the house. And not everyone heard me. We're in there. We start like closing it up. And when the storm passed over, I was literally holding the house with my arms, like my arms outstretched right now. I was literally holding it together like, oh, like Hercules. And it passed over. We survived. When I walked out, there was like no one there. It was only the people in the house that made it. And my interpretation of that dream was the house is very much like those who are awakened, those who are in touch with their spirit, higher consciousness, and are listening to the universe and are walking along that path. Because if you do that, you will be protected and guided. And the other people, they just perhaps in this dream, they just go back to that other dimension beyond space and time, and they choose a reboot. Who knows? But I think we have a much more electrical future ahead of us. I've had a lot of dreams like that, not all of them so kind of grim, but also it's very much speaking to how the earth is going to become more conscious. You increase the lightning strikes by 20x. Each one of those is like a neural spike in our brain, but for Earth. So Earth herself is becoming like a super consciousness right now. She already is, but she's about to like reach a whole new level. And
she's ascending.
Yeah. And it's less us ascending and more her ascending and us being taken along for the ride. And I mean, to keep it kind of grounded in our day to day, when you see things with new levels of consciousness, and you see reality better for what it is, that often means that you no longer have certain friendships or relationships. Like there's a lot of people I just don't talk to in my life through no ill will usually, but it's just, there's no longer a resonance. And so that could explain that Earth is rising in frequency, establishing a new resonance, and anything that's not resonant is not going to be given energy, because that's how resonance work. It literally is energy and information transfer. And so it's just going to be a natural progression. And that is what I think is going to happen. What I really perceive the future to be. You've had a lot of, mediums and channelers on your YouTube channel. So it'd be interesting to know from your perspective and who you've met with, whether that is in coherence with, what a lot of people are saying.
Yes, definitely. And I love that you bring it into like a grounded perspective as well, knowing that Earth is on an ascension timeline. And we chose to be here at this time because we wanted to be on that fast track lane into whatever new density the Earth will eventually end up in. And that is affecting every single person. And I love that you mentioned that the lightning strikes and all this electrical activity is like the Earth making more connections in its, neural pathways I was just recently in Egypt and, learning a lot about the energy grids of the earth and how, a lot of these pyramids and temples were built along the ley lines of the planet, which many cultures call the dragon lines as well, which is very interesting, going back to, the mythology of dragons. But that's a whole nother story, a
Yeah.
whole nother rabbit hole. To keep it really amongst the energy grids, what is their impact right now? Because you already have these pyramids built on massive energetic portals. If the earth is shifting, what do you think will happen to these portals that are already established on earth?
That's a good question. And I mean, I definitely believe in that because I've experienced it when I went to Egypt. And B, I also do believe in like an energy grid, ley lines. And a lot of people have done work on that, so I'm not going to discount their work. I do want to verify it myself. Like one of my goals I have in the next, I guess, couple of years is to get some geophysical equipment and to actually measure this myself. Now, to preface, I think that the human body is like the ultimate instrument. And so people walking these ley lines, they may use like the sticks, right? And they'll measure the width of them, and I guess they're changing. That's what some reports are saying. But I think it'd be really great to get some hard science measurements on this and perhaps find how these ley lines, dragon lines are shifting and changing with this evolutionary process. I think we can really be guided as to where these energetic hot spots are in these portals based on the geology, and the existence of prior structures like the pyramids, because that, like when I was there and you saw them, they're huge. I mean, they are insane, bro. So like that's not going anywhere. That's the thing. It's like work done. And this applies to us too in our awakening ascension process. And sometimes we forget this. And so we need to like ground ourselves in this. Work done is work done. No one's deconstructing that pyramid. They would have to put in just as much, if not more work to take it apart than to put together. And no one in their right mind is going to want to do that, right? What's the benefit of that other than just like, unless their only intention or goal is to destroy that energy hotspot. And I don't know anyone that does, right? And so it's staying there. It's pretty permanent now. It'll very slowly erode on a geologic timescale, millions of years. But that part of Giza gets like very little rain, right? The Nile isn't going to flood up to the pyramids, especially now that's been dammed and things of this nature. But, the erosion is very low there. I mean, that is like a permanent geologic structure now. It's not going away. And so that portal and energy nexus is going to change. The geology that informs some of these hot spots, magnetic anomalies, things like the Richat structure, things like the Bengui magnetic anomaly in Africa. There's a whole bunch. I think those are going to maintain like the most foundational Earth grid. And then the energy portals that we create, or the ones that are created by nature, which is a little bit more flexible and not as fixed and permanent, right? Because you can have a force and then all of a sudden the force can burn down. Those are going to be the ones that are shifting more in this age of air that we're in. But I would really love to measure them. And I think it's important to explore them to see how it interacts with you and really to be guided by intuition in that. Just to like, if you just feel drawn to something, right, embrace that air energy and go there and see what happens, because it may just shift everything for you and all of a sudden open up all these doors. Whereas before, like, well, I can't focus on this or do that because I don't have the time, energy, or bandwidth, but blast that door open, right? And then all of a sudden make it happen. Universe wants you to listen to your intuition. Spirit is always talking to you. And Earth, again, she's in this resonance upgrade process. She wants us to be there and to anchor in these new higher vibrational energies. Because Earth is amazing. She already does so much herself. But if we work as stewards of the Earth, we can transform the planet more than any other process can. like the Amazon rainforest, for example. I haven't been there. Maybe you haven't gone to Colombia.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, there's so much evidence now showing that that was like cultivated for thousands of years, right? And that those are the lungs, the biggest oxygen producers on our planet. And so that's what we need to be doing as a species, I believe, is that we need to not only be there along the ascension process with the earth, but also to be like, amplifying is not the right word, but like optimizing and just making that whole thing more harmonious, harmonizing the entire process for ourselves, for the earth, for all life on the planet, for the solar system, all the other, interdimensional entities and beings that also call this place home. Let's be aware of them, right? And this will have an influence in our present, obviously a beneficial influence for the future, but it's also going to influence everything that happened in the past because time isn't just linear. And so we need to really awaken as to the importance of that mission and to really step up and do that. That is what I believe.
And recently we had what you called the greatest synchronicity of all humanity, that it had very much to do with the Easter Island and, the eclipse, the solar eclipse that just happened just a few days ago, passing right over it at its maximum point. And the takeaway there was that we are here to also learn from the past mistakes of these ancient cultures, like the ones in Easter Island that were highlighted during this solar eclipse. What do you think we're also here to learn from these past mistakes?
Yeah, and I want to clarify that, I mean, there's some different beliefs and ideas as to what happened with Easter Island in the ancient culture there. But it does appear, we know that there was like an ecological collapse on the island because they lost all their trees. And that's, if you're a tiny little isolated island, it's probably not a good thing. But I mean, it's a crazy, without going into like the specifics of that synchronicity, this annular solar eclipse on October 2nd occurred in the sign of Libra, which is all about balance and harmonizing and seeing both sides and reaching this integration. But it's also a sign very much about making decisions. So like the lower expression is that you aren't making any decisions, right? You're playing both sides and you're kind of this mutable person that just pleases everybody or the situation, whatever. But the higher expression is about making clear choices to find that balance. Saturn, the strict farmer and kind of judge of time is exalted in Libra. So that's a higher expression. And this occurred, so again, it occurred in the sign of balance and harmonization. And we had this eclipse pass directly over Rapa Nui Island, which was, so isolated. The chance of that is so crazy. At the same time, the dwarf planet that's named after the creator god of the Rapa Nui, Maki Maki, is in perfect conjunction by longitude, which is insane because it was named Maki Maki because it was discovered shortly after Easter, right? And that's why Easter Island was named, because it was discovered on Easter back in 1722. And guess what? Maki Maki was in the same sky position on the day of the discovery of Rapa Nui Island by the Europeans. So it's just mind-boggling. But it brings in these themes and ideas of Easter as well, which is all about like resurrection and like new beginnings and fertility and spring, right? And so it's a solar eclipse. So it's a new beginning. This is a big new beginning for us. And because it's such a powerful synchronicity, I think this is one that's going to go out for a very long time, like a very long time. Not like, 2 weeks and it's done, like decades, perhaps. This is really speaking to, okay, we need to actually come into awareness and consciousness as to what we're doing with our planet. How are we treating her? There's a lot of people doing a lot of great things. There's a lot of people, maybe even more so like, these mega conglomerates, right, that aren't doing a lot of great things. We need to actually do what we need to bring our planet back into harmony, into balance. If we do that, we can experience this tremendous, new resurrection blessing, you could say, across the planet. But the story of the Easter Islanders is that, they lost their ecosystem, their trees. We don't exactly know why. Again, it's a contentious issue, but the population collapsed. They were no longer making these moai statues. Maybe there was some sort of natural disaster. We find them like scattered everywhere. Like, why aren't they like upright in their original positions, right? It's not like they were thousands of years old like Egypt. We see these things very well preserved in Egypt, but in Easter Island, all the moai are scattered and some of them are sunk all the way down to like the top of their head. It's bizarre. And so I think we have less time than people may think we do to really make these decisions. And so universe gives us grace and time, and we are active co-creators, but the time really is now. I think that's what that synchronicity is telling us. And it points to a really, really beautiful future if we collectively walk that path. And that starts with us individually. What are we actually doing in our day-to-day?
What do you feel is the biggest decision that humanity is confronted with right now?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it has to do, I think it really has to do with what, the earth and what do we truly want? I mean, this isn't necessarily an answer, but we go back to the beginning of our most recent era of civilization. So we go back to the pre-pottery Neolithic, the very end of the Younger Dryas. There may have been ancient civilizations before that, right? We have been anatomically the same as Homo sapiens for 400,000 years. There's no reason why there could not have been ancient civilizations in the past that there just aren't traces of now. Regardless, we've gone through a whole sweep of different types of society and cultures. If we go back to the age of Gemini, the age of Taurus, we had these villages. People were pretty peaceful and, pastoral. There doesn't seem to be that much violence. There's very few weapons that are found during that period. This is the Neolithic Revolution period. This is 5000 BCE. So 7,000 years ago. They had very, very developed spiritual beliefs. And I think they had a greater connection collectively to Earth and Gaia consciousness and spirituality than we do now, for a variety of reasons. But, humans, we were alive and existed, and we were shepherds of the earth. And it was a very fruitful time back then. Then we've gone through other periods. We can look at Greek culture. We can look at Roman culture. We can look at what happened afterwards with the Middle Ages. Also, we can look at China, Africa, Asia. We can look at North America, South America, all this stuff, right? But we really need to choose what type of culture and civilization do we want to be? We've had all the different experiences now, right? We don't have to just keep going in a linear direction. We can pick and choose and say, this is what we want. We can go back to that more village-centered, earth-centered, divine feminine-centered, earth goddess focused culture if we want to. And not everyone's going to want that. Maybe it's not going to be exactly that either. We need to blend divine feminine, divine masculine, and just create. We have a choice. It's not like we have to just keep going the direction we're going. I think that's what I really see.
And this whole time period is about, as you said, the resurrection, the new beginnings. I've heard you say that we're also starting a whole new eclipse cycle going up until 2027, and that eclipses are fated energy points. So what do you feel will these next eclipses that are going to happen in our atmosphere, what are they also bringing to us in that sense of fate that I know you believe in?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because it's again synchronistic. Like our past set of eclipses, and we're actually going to have a couple more out of sign, but without going to the details, our last set was in Aries and Libra. So it was very much about personal self empowerment with Aries, and then also looking at our relationships with others, the greater collective, right, and harmonizing that. And they aren't, necessarily antithetical to each other. You can integrate them together by being like a more self-aware, conscious person that improves your relationships with others and how you show up in all these things. The next set is going to be in Pisces and in Virgo. And so Pisces is about the deep spiritual collective. And then Virgo is the sign, is this earth sign, feminine earth sign that deals with, the purity of things. And so I see again, these things aren't necessarily opposite of each other. It's if we focus on these Virgo themes, and there's more eclipses happening in Virgo than in Pisces. All the Pisces ones are all like lunar eclipses. They're all endings, which is interesting. All the Virgo ones, there's a blend, but we're given like this 18-month period now where we can focus on to a greater degree, how can we connect to the earth? How can we help the earth in terms of this ascension process that she's going through? How does this connect to our health and our wellness? How does being healthy help us in terms of our consciousness and how we can actually make a difference, our energy levels, but then also like, how does the earth make us healthy? Like, what are we doing to the earth to give us, food that's actually nutritious? Like, that's such a big thing right now, right? Which would be a lot to get into here, but like our food in the United States is like all the processed food is basically like poison, right? So, I mean, we see these things, we need to work on them. We're giving this opportunity. And then in the background, we have this energy also in Pisces, the other side of the axis, talking about the collective that we have together and how our consciousness is blending. And so it's really now just having come out of this Aries and Libra cycle, how does your own individual consciousness evolution journey have a ripple effect, that mandala effect going out and helping other people beneficially, because you are a part of that collective consciousness and everyone's connected together this way. And you're just your mindset, just a smile on your face, how that can really transform things for some people. You bump into them, or maybe even someone on the other side of the world. I know you and I both had that experience having YouTube channels. I'm sure you've had a tremendous amount of people reach out to you saying like, you've transformed my life, or you've helped me in so many ways. And that's just us as two dudes, right? Walking along our path and doing the best we can. A lot of people are doing that. And I think that is really, if we all just walk along our own path, we can all have similar levels or even greater levels of influence. Just the influence that we need to have for everyone to reach this greater, more harmonious state. And the earth is guiding this whole process. I don't think we are doing a lot of things to the earth in terms of our resource extraction, depletion, and all the energy we're pumping into the earth in terms of, burning fossil fuels and cellular EMFs and all this stuff. But I don't want to paint the earth as just like a victim. I think she's much more in charge of this than a lot of people may think. But she's asking us very, very gently, but also kind of sternly, to just be aware of what we're doing. She's asking us to be more conscious.
And when we were in Egypt, a lot of people might think, oh, like the biggest lesson from the Egypt trip was probably like you had these massive activations, you saw a UFO, you saw dragons, you did all these energetic things. But actually, the biggest lesson from that trip was grounding. Like our journey was split into two. And, the first part, we were going down the Nile from Aswan all the way up to Luxor and then back. And then we had the second half of our journey start in Cairo. When our group got to Cairo, we were not in the 3D at all. Like everyone was like up here, like activated, charged, doing all these, energetic movements. And we had a full on day just to be human, just to be grounded. And that's also goes into the balance and the harmony that you've been speaking into. And I love the balance that you hold on keeping all of this knowledge and information grounded and also in our bodies. Because if we're all constantly up here trying to connect with the stars, then we forget that we're on an already super conscious planet called Gaia. So when people are going through these, let's say, ascension symptoms, how do you stay in a state where you can navigate these new energies and not let these symptoms affect you in such a big way?
Yeah, I really love that you brought up grounding. I think it's a key, like a very key aspect to all this. And it's simple and complex. I mean, it's as simple as just making sure you connect to Earth on a fairly regular occurrence, ideally daily. But it's also, I mean, it's mindset, and it's like, where's your mind, your focus, your emotions, right? It really is the whole spiritual process. And I mean, the soul activity right now is just pumping this all up to such a great degree. And I think it's really making it absolutely vital to be grounded and to be earthing constantly. And if you do that, then you get these uploads and downloads from Gaia and spirit. But we have higher spirit. We probably have a fairly similar belief system in this, right? There are different energetic levels that we have. And part of our consciousness is right there with God, right? And then there's higher spirit and kind of going down. But if I was like a little energy orb, then I would know I'm a little energy orb, and I'm not right now, right? Like maybe part of my consciousness is, but most of it is centered right now in my body. And so it's like, yes, we are moving towards higher spirit and this awakening process, and living more in 5D is awesome and amazing. It's beautiful and there's so much to it. But me personally, I'm not an energy orb yet. I still have a body. That is the thing that we've been given to work with. That is still grounding us into these more three-dimensional realities. And so that is where it starts. Everything else is awesome, amazing, so much there. But we just have to be mindful with that higher consciousness to respect and honor the physical vessel that we have been given, because that really is a tremendous gift. I mean, life is just everything working to keep coherence and order amongst this total backdrop of seeming chaos, right? I mean, the amount of reactions occurring in our body every second, we can't even count. And then think about all the bacteria and microorganisms that live within us, right? There's 10 times more of them than there are our cells in our microbiome. They're all doing their own things too. But somehow this all stays coherent, and I'm not just like phasing in and out, or, my finger, it's just, it stays orderly and coherent. And so with ascension symptoms, if we were to really summarize it and kind of simplify it, I think we're seeing people raise their vibration, and the higher frequency you go, the harder it is to maintain coherence. This is like pretty basic physics. But it can be done. It just requires more mindfulness and consciousness. And so that is going to require you, because this is our foundation, our container, that is going to require you to keep your body in a more coherent state. And so that is as simple as earthing and grounding. It's as simple as, making sure you eat good, clean, whole, organic food. And not just food that people say is good for you, but the food that your body actually wants. And so again, it's connecting to higher spirit with intuition to then inform yourself of, what does my body want? And then you nourish your body with that. And guess what? You will then be able to reach even higher into these 5D realms, right? And not everyone has an ability to read the Akashic records, perhaps in terms of natural latent talent, but I think everyone can develop these skills. But we all have our own unique gifts and expressions in terms of 5D, you could say. But our body is the key. And the simplest thing you can do is earthing and grounding, just to connect to Earth, just to get out to natural environments. But also like play, dance, movement, yoga, like stretching. All these things are just so, so, so good for you. And we have to be mindful of when our body asks us for that, to not let our mind override it, because it's really easy to get caught up in the day to day. Like yesterday, I have so much work to do right now. Yesterday, I was doing something and then I had more to do. I was like, no, I'm going outside. I'm going to sunbathe for like 30 minutes. I'm going to read a book. This is what I need. And that was the right thing to do. But we just have to keep ourselves accountable. And that, again, it just all goes back to just really being in tune with your needs and directing higher consciousness to that, and to not get lost in your thoughts, because your thought is not you. So if you have a thought saying, hey, do this, is that actually you though, right? Is that you telling you what you need to do? Or is it just a thought, some other program saying that would be fun to do though, right? And so it's very important to just be mindful of that.
Stefan, and do we even know what the sun is?
No, I don't. No, I mean, yeah, no, I think we know. I think we know what the sun is better from a spiritual perspective, honestly, than we do from a physical 3-dimensional perspective. And maybe like a NASA scientist would disagree with me. But, and again, I'm like no real expert on this stuff, but the more I research into it, the more I realize how much of our science, especially as it relates to the solar system and things of this nature, is built on models and then also built on very limited observations. And these ideas become kind of like these foundational facts, but they're still very much ideas. And so we can look at the sun with different wavelengths of light and we see these explosions and things, and it's crazy, but we can't see beyond that surface. Just like, I look a certain way, you look a certain way. But once you strip away the skin, our bodies are crazy different, right? I mean, all the different systems, the lymphatic system, the blood vessels, everything, we look gnarly on the inside. And then you pair your way in, it gets really wild, right? I think it's probably the same with the sun. And we just see the surface, and that's really all we know. And so, like, what is the sun? There's this book I was talking about by Alan Leo, the astrology book. And there's a lot of people have talked about this. If you have if consciousness is based on vibration, and you have consciousness like in the Schumann resonances, then you would expect there to be consciousness with plasma, this very vibrational state of matter that can maintain great coherence, even though it's so vibrational. So, I mean, personally, I believe that there's a whole layer of consciousness in our plasosphere, and that's maybe where a lot of deities and angels live, because that's such a highly vibrational realm that they don't need actual physical shape. They may have their own reality kind of like this, but they are in this completely energetic dimension. And that would then extend out to other planets, that extend out to Jupiter. Jupiter is a storm planet. It has so much electrical activity, like far greater than Earth, but very similar to Earth's. And so there's probably a mass, Jupiter's huge, right? It's probably a massive sphere of consciousness. You have the greater super consciousness of Jupiter, but then probably a lot of other interdimensional beings live there. Same thing with the sun. This is what I believe. This is kind of with a more new age 21st century model of consciousness, but there's probably a whole network of consciousness that lives around the sun and perhaps even within inside the sun that's all influencing the solar system. And so I don't think we need to think of like life as like, little gray beans and spaceships flying around. But when we enter into higher states of consciousness, all of a sudden we can start to see these other dimensions of reality, as you saw with the pyramids. And as I've seen before with, we call them UFOs, unidentified flying objects. But I think what we're really seeing is kind of like an interdimensional phenomenon. And that there's a lot of evidence for that.
Yeah. And it almost seems, because we had on a channeler, Pamela Erlin, and she has the ability to channel human beings from the future. And I've heard a lot of her material, and constantly what keeps coming up in the future is that humanity is starting to use plasma as an energy source to power their vehicles, or certain different systems that go on, that we've created. So it almost seems like there's a link between the higher a species goes in consciousness, the more they understand about plasma energy. So what do we know now about plasma, and where do you think that's headed out into the future?
Yeah, plasma. What is a word even, right? Like what is that word? What do we even, does that word like encapsulate what it actually is? What we see is that we have solids. I'll use my hair comb here. We have solids. This is like, a whole bunch of atoms that are very closely packed together. They have a whole bunch of bonds, and there's still a tremendous amount of energy and vibration in like an atom and in this structure here. But it's solid. It's not as vibrational as like a liquid, which is, my water in my cup here. Those bonds are a little weaker. They can flow and move around. Again, though, almost all of this is empty space. If we look at it at like the atomic level, it's just mostly empty space, which is crazy. Then we have gas, like the environment here, the air that I'm breathing. These are now able to float around and pass each other. But but they still have coherent molecular structures. Like the electrons are still close in around the nuclei of these atoms. But with plasma, you actually have things start to break apart into their constituent parts. And so it's much more fluid. And you don't really have like clear atoms or elements anymore. I mean, you have nuclei, which is kind of like the foundation of an atom or an element, but you start to have just a lot more flexibility and variability. And so we have this weak layer of plasma up the uppermost part of our atmosphere, the ionosphere. The sun is shooting plasma towards us all the time. There's plasma out in the radiation belts and Earth's magnetosphere, and Jupiter's magnetosphere is pumped with supercharged plasma. We see that because it reaches Earth every 13 months. This is like Jovian flux. We see that plasma, these highly charged ions, even though they're super vibrational, and we look at, like, for example, the step down, air as being a very chaotic process, right? You like spray something in the air and it just like disperses out, right? Plasma seems to have an ability to maintain great coherence. So order and structure, even though it's so vibrational, everything wants to go its own way. And that has a few interesting properties. It means in space as a superconductor that the plasma ions, even though they're super vibrational, they form these fixed structures in these stable magnetic fields. And that is then able to travel and move through space as a coherent energy and information packet. But then when it arrives somewhere, interacts, it's able to do a tremendous amount of work and like information transfer because it's so vibrational. And so it's going to be learning how we can take these highly vibrational states of matter and keeping them in orderly, coherent structures, helping them, I would say, rather, to do that. Because we see plasma get produced naturally. So it's not necessarily like working against the will of God, you could say, right? It's very much a natural phenomenon. And we just need to learn how to tap into that and how to create spaces, just like you've created this container for us. How can we create like containers for plasma where it wants to live there, right? That this can naturally just exist there and manifest there. And then how can we use that perhaps for energy at the most basic, I think. But I would not be surprised if we find that there's a tremendous amount of use for plasma outside of just energy. Like maybe there's new ways of communication that are enabled by plasma. I mean, who knows? This is just one of those technological breakthroughs that will very likely happen in our lifetime, where we have no way to know what the long-term effects of it are going to be. I think it's going to be mind-blowing to us. But at the minimum, we can see how it's going to impact our energy generation. But I think it's going to go so far beyond that we just be speculating and we'll probably be off. It's probably going to be even bigger and better than that.
It's a whole new state of matter that we are just beginning to understand.
Yeah, I mean,
Incredible.
I think you have to spend a lot of time just researching into it and or like meditating into it. That's my way of research of meditation is like research into it. I think you just have to spend a lot of time with that idea and concept of plasma to just start to understand it. You know, you read a sentence on Wikipedia, it does not really get it, but we have plasma in our bodies. I mean, we're discovering plasma everywhere. And so it's not like we are separate from it. We are also very much plasma beings. Because these are ions, right? And so we have ions all throughout our body and these different charged particles and the flow and movement of that. That is all plasma. Our blood, you know, you take the red blood cells out. What is it called? It's called plasma. So we also are part of this, you could say, like existence and lineage. And I think we're going to start coming into that as these energies go up and we raise these higher states. And Gaia, super consciousness, gifts us these ideas that perhaps were known long ago and these technologies that perhaps were known in the past.
Mm. So what's the deeper, let's say maybe spiritual and scientific meaning of getting out and doing those sunbathings that you're talking about, apart from just getting like a nice little tan?
Oh, bro, you got one.
Why? Yeah, I got one in Egypt. I was like, oh my God, I came back a whole different color.
Wow.
But so what is that? What are we really doing when we're sunbathing and receiving these codes from the sun?
I see it. I mean, there's a lot of things, of course. I mean, we're just receiving and changing our actual vibratory makeup, though. You go into the force, for example, and we have all these natural energy fields existing up in the atmosphere, what we call the troposphere. So at the surface, right? These Schumann resonances, which a lot of your viewers are probably aware of. You know, the first foundational mode, 8 hertz, second one, 14 hertz. It's pulsing that many times per second. This is just light energy. But we measure those in the ground. And the telluric currents in the earth get stronger the deeper you get because the earth becomes more conductive as you go down. There's a reason why our magnetic field is generated at the core. It's super conductive down there. You need this flow of conductive material to generate magnetic fields. And so these telluric currents only get stronger the deeper you go. And so you go into the forest, trees have roots that go tremendously deep. A lot of these graphics online, they show them like just at the surface. I was like spelunking in, what was it? It was Hungary and Budapest. And the roots went down like 60 meters. Like you see these very thin tendril roots. They're not big, thick ones, but those are super, super conductive because they're loaded with water and ions. And so, of course, those get snapped off when the tree falls because they're not support roots, but they are nutrient, water, and information roots. They are going down into those really deep telluric currents, bringing that up and turning them into magnetic fields, because that's just the movement of flow of charge creates these magnetic fields. And so when you go out into the forest, for example, you are just immersing yourself in that new vibratory environment made up of the information and magnetic fields of just the trees, but also of the deep earth, and they are connecting up into the atmosphere too. And so you are literally just changing your vibratory environment and therefore your actual vibration yourself. And that changes your experience of consciousness. You're just retuning that. We are these resonance mechanisms and machines. So we will enter into resonance with our environment because we have this like flexible resonance ability, you could say. So with sunbathing, it's just doing that, but a more solar focused way. I think when you go out in the sun, and you're doing like mindful sunbathing, you don't want to get sunburned, of course, but you're like mindfully connecting to the sun, then you are connecting to those solar energies much more strongly. And that is, helps to supercharge your solar plexus and your heart chakra, really gets your engine going. And so that's one of the big keys that I have in terms of earthing and like navigating ascension symptoms to bring it back to that. I think one of the best things you can do is just to bring more of this coherent, purifying solar energy into your system and just push everything else out. We know that, there's steps and evolutions that we go through. but people can have like entities, for example, entity attachments. We don't need to get into it, but you bring in more solar light and energy, anything that like has hooks or claws or any of this stuff, they're not going to want to be part of that, bro, because they're not, they can't handle the light. So we have these slow, right, but physical bodies that our spirit is housed within, but is able to handle these really powerful solar energies and transmute them and clarify them and just, push that out not only for ourselves and our own spiritual growth and evolution, but then for others through our actions. And so that's why I think it's so important to not only work with like Gaia energy, but also solar energy. The two are very harmonious together. They're best friends. And if you do that, then everything kind of falls into place.
Stefan, do you think that, talking about recorded history, because I know there's so much history that is off record, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, but in recorded history, have we ever seen the sun emitting these mass ejections and these solar storms like we are seeing now?
Yes. I'd say probably the best example would be like 14,000 years ago. Though it may not have been from the sun, but it was right around the time of the Younger Dryas. It was right before. And so the question, I need to research into it more, but the question that I have is, okay, did we get this big push of energy from our sun or outside of our solar system, which then triggered all the big changes of the Younger Dryas, the big temperature fluctuations and a lot of things that we saw? There was massive flooding. I think there's a lot of ideas for that, the Younger Dryas impact theory. But we have evidence of really big pushes of energy just in terms of actual like particles and ions coming in. 14,000 years ago is a great example. That could have been from the sun. Also could have been from like a supernova blasting off nearby. I think we're given these big pulses of energy at time. The hard thing is though, is that it's difficult to recreate these events, you could say, because it's in the geologic record. The further back you go, the fuzzier it gets. And what we're measuring with this are isotopes and the concentrations. And so you need to find a good, clean source that has them well preserved and that the noise level, you could say, is low. The signal stands out. And then, if we see a spike in isotopes created because of this energetic event, it's hard to say whether it's from the sun or from some other influence, because there's a lot of things that can spike up an isotope value. And so there are ways to be a little bit more precise, but we see that 14,000 years ago. And I bet if we applied more work and effort there, and we were to look at the past million years, we would see probably a lot of other clear spikes in our record that's indicating either extreme solar activity and or extreme, you could say, cosmic activity, because we know these things happen. And so it's just, how often does it happen on the human time scale? And I think it's probably more often than we think right now, but not also every single day, or like, it's guaranteed to happen in 10 days or 10 years or something. Like, it can occur, we should be aware of it, but it's not perhaps imminent. We just don't know. We just don't know when the next massive push of energy is going to come in from our sun or from our cosmos. I'm talking like one of these massive events, not like what we just saw yesterday, or actually today, with the solar flare that, was exactly Earth bullseye that's going to hit us in like 36 hours or so. We get those fairly regularly, you could say, kind of, but every 14,000 years, that's a different story in terms of the scale of that event. What does that mean? I don't know.
We're here for the train ride.
It's going to be crazy. Choo choo. Yeah.
Will we be seeing the first nova explosion of our lifetimes coming up pretty soon?
Well, there is this star that goes nova, TCRB, and it dramatically increases in brightness. But it's pretty far away. It's like 3,000 light years away. And so it'll appear as a star, whereas before there was no star visible to our eye. But I think you're more asking maybe like, will we see like a supernova explosion in our lifetime? That is something I find really interesting. We have a lot of recorded instances in history where all of a sudden a supernova blast off and they see it for like a month or 2 months or like months in the daytime
in
sky.
recorded history.
Yeah. Because we have supernovas going off all the time in the universe. Now, the question is, okay, will we have one go off in our galaxy? That occurs a little less often, but it occurs at a fairly regular clip. And then for you to have a really, really bright supernova, it needs to be like fairly close to your interstellar cluster. And so if we were to have one that's far enough away to not like destroy our planet, you're right, but close enough that it's like a really big event. I mean, we would see that in the daytime sky, right? You'd have your sun. Sometimes you can see, the moon in the sky, in the daytime sky, because she's reflecting some of the light, but she's not that bright, right? But then you would also see this massive, super bright star in the sky. And I think just what's the energy and information coming in from an event like that? That I find really interesting, because everything contains energy and information. We had the biggest of all time gamma ray burst back in October of 2022. So actually, basically exactly 2 years ago. I think it was October 9th. I'm pretty sure it was October 9th.
Another synchronicity.
Yeah, bro. So that was the biggest of all time, though. And not just by a small amount. Like, it put every other gamma ray burst like way down on the scale. So what this is we're measuring the highest vibrational wavelength of light. So these are gamma rays. And they will ionize and hit and absorb into things instantly. And so there was some massive explosion that occurred like 2 billion light years away. And so you have to think about how that light propagates out through the universe. And even after 2 billion years where it's getting absorbed into everything that it passes through, of course, I mean, space is mostly empty, but it still has a lot of stuff in it. There's electrons and ions in the interstellar medium. It's all constantly being absorbed. When it arrived on Earth, 2 billion light years away from that source, we had the biggest of all time count. And so, I mean, you have to, like, the scale of that is beyond comprehension. For it to be such a strong signal, even after propagating out and being absorbed so much by everything it's passed through. And so I wonder, like, what was the information contained within that was delivered to Earth, and how has she been then delivering that information to us? Again, it's synchronicity that we're talking about it now, 2 years after it occurred. I think to the day, I think it was October 9th, maybe it was October 7th that it occurred. And those sort of events aren't talked about much in the astrological community, because I think a lot of astrologers, I love them, God bless them, I think they need to study a little bit more.
God bless them.
Yeah, they need to study a little bit more into astronomy. And so sometimes they leave some of these events out of their framework because they're so focused on the planets or the moon, and that's great. But that signal that came in 2 years ago, as an example, that could be playing out now for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, who knows? We don't know when the next gamma ray burst is going to come in that is of a similar scale. It could be, they call that a 1 in 10,000 year event. That's our current understanding, is that it's a 1 in 10,000 year event. So that's not a supernova that we saw, like, a star lighting up in the sky, but it's very similar. And I think about that energetic imprint from the universe, God, what is it delivering to us to integrate and to move forward with?
What have you read about the star Betelgeuse in the Orion constellation?
Yeah, Betelgeuse is a red giant, and there's been a lot of conversation and chatter about it going supernova like very soon. And it could. Like, it very well, like tomorrow, could be that supernova candidate. It's very close to us too. So if it did, it would be wild. I mean, it'd be crazy. We'd hope that supernova beam is not centered on Earth, right? Or else we're ascending to a whole new dimension totally.
We have no darkness then.
Yeah, then we're done with that. But we don't know when that's going to go off in terms of scientifically. So maybe there's other ways to feel into that, right? I don't put that out of the realm of possibility. but that could explode tomorrow. That could explode like, a million years from now, 500,000 years from now. We don't know. But we know it's at a critical point where it's ready to supernova. That's what it seems. And people have been talking about more because there do seem to be some changes in its light spectrum, its profile just recently. But again, I like to back up. And it's like, how long have we been tracking this? Our timeline is like, let's say 100 years maximum for this. We don't know if that's all just within normal variations or not. That's the hard thing to know. But that is a big energy center for Earth because it is in the Orion constellation, right? That has a ton of significance too. One of the brightest constellations in our sky, right?
The pyramids are aligned with Orion's belt.
Exactly. And so that's definitely maybe not one to expect to blast off, but anyone that has these gifts that can connect to these energies, I would say that's one to connect to and to feel into those energies. Because that's very much like fire, plasma energy, like, new beginnings and pure creation, God potential. And so I think there could be a lot of really interesting and important messages that come in from channeling perhaps Betelgeuse. And I'm not someone that has too much skill with channeling in that sense, but I know a lot of your viewers,
not yet, Stefan.
I'm
not yet.
Still a young dude, but I know a lot of your viewers do. So that would be just an open call to anyone in this community to do that and to share what they find on your channel.
Let us know in the comments what you pick up with Betelgeuse.
Yeah, that's definitely one. I think our science has a hard limit there. And then this is where this sort of investigative work comes in. And that's where we really start talking to spirit to understand that better.
Yeah. You brought up gamma, and I'm really curious to go into what occurs when the brain waves enter that gamma state. What happens then to consciousness?
Well, in general, we see a few things. We see just greater information bandwidth because it's a higher frequency wave. And so you just have a greater ability to encode information to a higher frequency wave. That's why, we had 4G and now we have 5G. So before it took, 5 minutes to download a 1 gigabyte file, and now it takes 5 seconds because it's just a higher frequency wave. And so we have that aspect. But we also have how we are able to start to change how our body actually responds to phenomenon. I was listening to a podcast yesterday about how when you enter into certain states of meditation, you can literally manipulate and control the autonomic nervous system and stop things like bleeding and pain perception. We see like there was a famous experiment done by Wim Hof where they injected him with this
E. coli.
Yeah. And he just entering into that state of meditation and breathing was able to have no immune response and fought it off, no problem. And so the quote that really resonated with me from that podcast was that it's not mind over matter, it's that mind is matter. And as you move into higher vibrational states of consciousness, like with gamma brain waves, I think your ability to manipulate matter just through the power of your mind increases. And so I need to be, I think it's something for all of us to put a lot of importance on and to really hold ourselves accountable with greater meditation practice because it seems incredible what's possible with that. And so there's something special about like gamma brain waves. I think that what we see when the human brain undergoes hypoxia, it also produces a ton of gamma brain waves going all the way up to like 200, 300 hertz. And perhaps that's when, if you die and your brain undergoes hypoxia, right? As anyone that dies eventually will lose oxygen in their brain. Perhaps that's like when they upload their experience and information into the Schumann resonances, into that field of consciousness that exists up there. And so it goes beyond just information bandwidth and be able to be more productive with things, and it goes beyond our ability to control the autonomic nervous system, but it perhaps even connects out into this greater dimension of reality, which I believe is at the base, like the base layer that is the Schumann resonances, and then there's other levels to it that go above and beyond, which most of which we probably have no conception or realization of, because I very much hold space for things that we don't know. But we see also with master meditators, when they are holding states of like just pure compassion, that all of a sudden gamma brainwave activity goes up like 2, 3, 4, 5x. And so it also seems that it's less about, like, let's say meditation training. Of course, these people have trained a lot, but it's not so much my perception about meditation training. It's about just the quality of what you're focusing on. And then that determines and guides the brainwave activity and the meditative state. And so if you're meditating and your focus is on universal love and compassion, that naturally then will manifest these higher vibrational states in your brain, in your body, in your spirit. And then that has that ripple effect going out. That's what it seems to me.
Beautiful. And one of the last things I wanted to get in with you is, you've said that there was a huge shift in your life after you learned about the Schumann resonance. So you've scattered it out throughout the conversation, but for, what do we need to know about the Schumann resonance right now and how that's impacting our life in general?
Yeah. So the Schumann resonances, they are this global energy field, and they're named after Winfried Otto Schumann. He was a German physicist, and we started learning about the different energetic layers of the Earth. And so he made this realization of, if we have an ionosphere and we have a ground surface, and both of them are fairly conductive as compared to our atmosphere in between, which is much less conductive, then that should form this natural cavity that these energy waves can bounce around in. And so he theorized that in the 50s, and they started to observe them experimentally in the late 50s and early 60s. And within just like a decade after that, like in the 70s, there were people experimenting with the Schumann resonance, creating these big coils and having people lay on them. And they were like, there's one report that this guy made this massive solenoid coil that you could lay on, and he pulls to Schumann frequency, and the person had like LSD-like symptoms, like experiences, like within seconds. Take that with a grain of salt. That was just, this report that was written by this guy. But very quickly, people put the connection and two together that these could be related to consciousness and also higher states of reality. And so they're created by lightning strikes, which are, driven by weather in our troposphere. They're created when you have sunlight hitting the ionosphere. And so when it's sunrise, you have Schumann resonances created. They kind of spike in your local environment about 40 minutes before sunrise that you see, because the sun will hit the ionosphere before that. So that explains how some people, they always wake up like clockwork right before sunrise, because you get this increase in Schumann resonances, which have the same frequency and power as our brain waves. And all of a sudden you have, a natural increase in brain activity, and boom, you're awake. So there's a whole bunch of things that create them, including us, all life on this planet, different geologic processes, earthquakes, for example. And they exist, and they're running through the ground surface, the atmosphere. We measure them in the ionosphere. We measure them out in space. They just seem to be everywhere. They change in their power and their frequency under the energetic conditions of the Earth. And so if you have the global electric circuit strengthen, you have the Schumann resonances strengthen. If you have solar activity go up, like during solar maximum, their frequency range changes. They become a little bit more vibrational. And so there's these natural fluctuations, but they've existed, we suppose, based on the physics and everything, they've existed since basically the birth of our planet continuously. They don't die out because there's always new lightning strikes, about 100 every second. And so unless you were to turn off the global electric circuit, that is like the ultimate, fail-safe database, you could say, for the Earth in terms of information. And so once I learned about that, it just blew my mind because it became something, and it's not everything. Let's be very clear with that. It's not everything, but it all of a sudden was able to explain all these different things to me from all these different fields that had different explanations. And we want generally the simplest explanation, Occam's razor. So like all of a sudden we had like, oh, this explains, or at least does a very good job of explaining this, that. It connects like, this ancient civilization group with the New Age Ascension group, and also space weather, and like just earth geophysics and consciousness and meditators and spiritualists. And it just combines all these things together, and it just immediately grabbed me. And I don't think it's coincidence at all that the video I made on them like 2-3 years ago, like really is the one that convinced me to take YouTube seriously, which then allowed me to really put more energy and effort into my own spiritual growth and development, but then also that education with others. So this is just my way of giving back. I don't claim to know everything, right? I'm just one person of many, as we all are, but we all just have to walk our path. And mine seems to be connected to the Schumann resonances and education about that. And I think our intuition is connected to them. So when intuition is speaking to you, I think maybe that's like some signal that you may have received from them. I mean, there was a study that was done showing that we can enter into perfect coherence with them at times. And the length of that coherence was the same as the duration of a thought. So they've measured the length of a thought. It's like 400 milliseconds or so. And they showed these periods of coherence with the Schumann resonances. We weren't in coherence with them all the time, but with this study that they did, they showed these like 400, 500 millisecond periods of coherence between the environmental Schumann field and our brainwave activity. And so when you have coherence and resonance, you have energy and information transfer. Who's to say that thought you made or that thought came in from out here? And so like intuition could be connected to them. There's just so many things. And there's this profound amount of information and guidance, I think you could say, stored within them. I think anyone that wants to connect to the earth, the easiest way to do that is through the Schumann resonances. And also through the sun too, because the earth takes in all these solar energies that if I was out there in space like this, it would just totally vaporize me basically, right? You would not want to get hit by a solar storm out in space. But the earth takes it, formats it, and then presents this information to us and puts it into the Schumann database. And so not only are you connecting to earth energy, you're also connecting to solar energy, and then also the energy of the entire solar system, Jupiter, Saturn, the outer gas giants, right? All the other planets that we have, dwarf planets, comets, and everything. I think it's really the great layer that connects everything together. We see how it's connected to climate and our atmosphere and the electrification of our planet, the global electric circuit. We see how it's connected to life, biology, physiology. I mean, it's like the center of everything, it seems. At this moment in time, I haven't found a more kind of grounding central thing in reality. And so it's just absolutely fascinating and definitely something to explore into in whatever way you can.
Yeah. One of our guides in Egypt, Hassan, he told us, he was an archaeologist as well. He said, the more you dig, the more you find. So I think what you're doing right now really encapsulates that, because you are an amazing researcher, but you're also allowing yourself to be open to continue digging. Because if a lot of archaeologists say, oh, we already digged up that site, like we don't need to look any further, but the more you dig, the more you find. So thank you so much for just taking us into that journey, into what you've been digging in your life and uncovering for humanity. We end every show with a segment called the Final Trio, which are just little rapid fire questions at the end. But where would you send people to connect with your wealth of research, knowledge, wisdom, amazing things that you're doing right now? Where would you send people to connect with you?
Yeah, the main channel would be my YouTube channel. So that's at Stefan Burns. And so where is it? There's my name, the spelling right there. It's the same spelling. But I also have a website, wildfreeorganic.com. So those are like I could say my two main channels. Um, and yeah, I would like to thank you because we are both digging, right? I think there's a lot of people out there digging, and the key to digging deeper is remaining open and to being able to reinvent yourself. Because as you have new information come in, new truths come in, you have to then, you know, resonate and adapt to that. And so, finding something and then just like waving that around for a while, that's what a lot of people do. And hey, that's fine. Everyone has their thing, but being able to reinvent and renew and regenerate and resurrect, that is really like the central theme that I think is upon us right now, especially with that annular solar eclipse that we just had. We talked about, we are in this great period of renewal, and yeah, it's really beautiful right now. And so that's just one of the ethos I kind of carry. And I think you carry that too. And you present a lot of amazing, information on your channel, guidance, love, healing. And yeah, really just appreciative of that.
Yeah. And not allowing that information just to stay in the intellect, but drop it into our heart and integrate it. I think that is the key. Because a lot has been said, a lot will be said, but whatever resonates, as you said, that's what we take with us. And wisdom we take with us to the next life. We don't just lose everything that we learned and integrated in this one. Like we lose the body, we lose what we bought, we lose our house, we lose all these material things, but we don't lose the love and the wisdom that we hold. And that carries on through infinity. So I love that you brought that up. And for the final trio, the first question I had for you is, what has space taught you about yourself?
Space, just space.
Yeah, it's just space.
Space. What has space taught me about myself? I've learned a lot about like how I react to space and what type of spaces I like and the type of person I present, or just I guess you could say how I express myself in different spaces. And to be very mindful and aware of that. And so I think that's a big thing. Sometimes we're in a space that we don't like, and we can kind of talk ourselves like, hey, we'll get through it. We'll get through it, whatever. And that is true. But there's also like, okay, I just don't like this space. I want to find a better space. I want to create a better space. And this extends out not just to like your local bubble or like, let's say your neighborhood, whatever, but all the way the entire earth and beyond. And so we want to create like good spaces. And when we have that focus on creating harmonizing, balanced spaces, then I think that's when we can really start to like be who we actually are and express ourselves and be 100% authentic and self-actualize. And that is what really people connect to and resonate with. And so putting on this kind of fake show doesn't fool anybody and doesn't win yourself any favors. At the end of the day, it's really just being who you are, and you don't have to be mean about it, but just be very authentic and loving and heart-centered with the space that you want to create and the space that you carry, and everything will naturally fit into place. You don't have to overthink it. That's what I've learned about space for myself.
Well said, brother. I'm encouraging people to go back and listen to that a few times, because that was powerful wisdom that just flowed through you.
I am a channel.
Channeler Stefan Burns. Burning up with the wisdom.
Yeah.
The second question is interesting, because I've heard you say before that in 100 years from now, we're going to know so much more about so many things. But what's one thing that you feel that humanity will have a much deeper scientific and spiritual understanding about in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things, of course. I mean, I could go so many ways with this. I think one of them, though, will be these connections that we have that a lot of, you could say, mainstream scientists will immediately discount. And so, for example, like the effect that the plants have on society, or how we have this comet right now passing directly in between the sun and the earth. And we now have had two very strong solar flares pop off, long duration. They were very similar in their characteristics, right as the comet passed in front of the first sunspot and then in front of the second one. And so I think with artificial intelligence and being able to just give it a lot of data and say, hey, like find the connections here, right? We need to make sure these models are good and it's not just making things up. But once we get past that, because we're getting there, I think that some of these things are too big to grasp onto and to handle with our own like research ability, unless you like devote everything to it. But quickly within like 10, 20 years or even sooner, we will be able to feed in all this information that we've collected through time about things like this, right? These planetary resonances, these odd, interesting temporal coincidences, you could say, right? Of how things line up. And we'll get pretty solid evidential answers back saying, yeah, there is a very clear connection. Here are the statistics. And then once we have that, because some of these things are just too hard for any one person or group to kind of like handle, but you put like AI supercomputer behind it, and I think it can do it. And then it'll really present to us like, whoa, like the planets do affect our reality. There's so many people that already know that, right? It's not like we need to convince them, but all the people that aren't convinced will have that data in front of them. And that is going to radically transform our understanding of reality on a collective scale, because now people can like on the collective scale say, oh, we have a great conjunction coming up between Jupiter and Saturn. Like we got some changes ahead of us, right? We have some things now to be aware of. We're not going to be caught off guard as easily. And we'll see the greater kind of majesty and coherence of like this symphony that's constantly playing in our solar system. I think a lot of this new ability to process really big data sets will be transformational just in the next like couple decades. And that goes in line with very much like our explorations into plasma and new technologies in that regard. I think we're going to have a much better ability, you could say, to kind of connect into some of these higher dimensions of reality through things like binaural beats and like and sound healing experiences and like vibratory beds, and just our understanding of vibration, I think is really going to go up. Because like the ancients, for example, let's go back to Age of Gemini, Age of Taurus, like 5000 BCE, let's say. They were doing some crazy stuff back then. I know that for a fact, that's for sure. But they didn't have like vibration beds, they didn't have some of this cool stuff.
What's the king's chamber?
Well, yeah, they had that. That's for sure. But we like, again, yeah, exactly. You start to like layer in the technological stack, big pyramid, and then like all this other stuff. I think some of the places that people are going to go is going to be just mind blowing. And what they come back with, these explorers, like we're not here to explore around the world and the oceans anymore so much. That's been done. And in space exploration, it's happening. It's going to be slow, arduous, and dangerous. But we are right now in the time of exploration of consciousness and like interdimensional reality, which is so far beyond that other stuff anyway. So the most exciting time to live. I mean, it's crazy. It's wonderful.
100% agree with you. And the last question we ask, we call it the time capsule question, because it requires us to travel out a little bit into the future, around 15 to 20 years. And I chose out those time frames because I believe that is going to be a time when the young generations of today will be stepping more into leadership positions around the world. And like any great leader, they are going to need great mentors, great teachers, and great guidance to allow them to be the best version and the best leader they can be. So you were given the opportunity to leave behind a time capsule for these leaders in the future that they would then open. And you can include anything that you want in the time capsule. It doesn't have to be necessarily something physical. It could be a message, a vibration, a code, a book, a teaching, whatever your mind can conceive of, but knowing that they're going to open this in 20 years down the line and instantly be equipped with the Stefan Burns tools to lead into this new era, this new age that we're all co-creating together? What would you leave behind in the time capsule?
I mean, yeah, that's a fun question. Again, so many ways to answer it. I would, in 20 years, I think there's going to be a great dependence on these, like, for example, AI models and stuff. And so it's important, like physical contact is important. Like being with people is important. Some of these basic things, which I think we may start to forget about in the future and just become a little disconnected from. And then that also goes further back to, like, I mean, I didn't, in this life, I did not live back in the 1700s and I didn't go exploring the seas. But when I was researching into Easter Island and this annular eclipse and synchronicity, the discovery of it, like, here are these Dutch explorers on 3 ships, totally like out there, just completely by themselves in the ocean. There's no backup. They can't, like, hey, Coast Guard, our ship, something happened, right? Like, they're running low on supplies. They find Rapa Nui, one of the most remote places on Earth. They see people there. They don't know anything, but they practice cannibalism.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, exactly. They practice cannibalism on Rapa Nui. They have that evidence. We don't know when it stopped, but like, they were so bold, courageous, and adventurous. And it's because they were in it and they had to do these things because there was no other way out. And we have so many, like, safety networks and support networks and all this stuff, or like the explorers who, like, discover the Antarctic, or the first people to climb Mount Everest, right? Like, there is the greatest of humanity comes out under these high pressure situations, and coal becomes diamond. And so I think it's very, 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 if I could encapsulate that into the time capsule, I mean, I didn't live back then, but, or like people Apollo 11, right? Like, their spaceship is literally like about to explode and they're like configuring it and fixing everything. Everything's going wrong. They're running out of oxygen, but we do it. I would encapsulate that because that's always there. It's always there, but I feel like we're going to become more and more distant from that raw sense of, like, adventure and exploration and really being in it. That would be a good thing for them to just, whoa, okay, like that could be my reality, right? Like, not everything is so soft and cuddly.
Yeah. And knowing that sense of adventure and courage is within our DNA, and when we're connected with our spirit, that's when that side of us can come out, because our spirit knows that nothing can harm it. So that's why these explorers could go to a remote island and explore, because they know that in their spirit, they are whole, they are integral, nothing is going to harm it. So I just want to acknowledge and honor your own courage for being a synthesizer of so many different fields and bringing that into a coherent manner. I feel like we touched on some very important topics, points, and pieces of wisdom that will carry on with people for many years to come. So I just wanted to thank you. Let's call this round 1, because I feel like we can still go on for many, many hours of conversation together, brother. It's been such an honor to be here with you, man.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the invite. And yeah, again, everything you're doing. We're both very much doing the same thing. It's so important right now. We are in this age of air, this age of, like, mental intellect and these atmospheric connections. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see the future, how it evolves, and just really honored and blessed to have been reached out to and to be able to meet your audience. Hello, everyone. Yeah.
It's not very new, because when I looked at the YouTube analytics, and it goes like channels that your audience watches, and you were there, and I was like, oh, okay, these guys know you, so we're good. Like,
hello again.
Hello again, and until next time.
Yes, absolutely.